What does it take to topple a titan? Is it a stock market crash, a government investigation, or is it something much smaller? Something as simple as a spilled glass of wine. This is the story of Gideon Caldwell, a man who built a $10 billion empire with his bare hands and an iron will. He was untouchable, a god of the modern age, worshipped in boardrooms and on magazine covers. But one rainy Tuesday night in the most exclusive restaurant in New York City, he made a fatal mistake. He unleashed his fury on a quiet waitress, a woman he dismissed as a nobody. He never imagined that this nobody held the key to his past, and that her final whispered words wouldn't just end her shift. They would end his entire world. Stay with us to witness the moment a whisper became an earthquake that shattered a billionaire's life. The city of New York gleamed under a persistent August drizzle, the kind that didn't wash the streets clean, but merely coated them in a slick, reflective sheen. Inside the hushed, opulent sanctuary of Ethelgard, the weather was an irrelevant, distant concept. Here, the only climate that mattered was the one dictated by wealth and power. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil, aged leather, and the quiet, confident hum of the city's elite. Crystal glasses chimed with the sound of discreet success, and conversations were held in low conspiratorial tones, as if the very secrets of the global economy were being exchanged over plates of seared scallops and saffron risotto. At the center of this universe, holding court at the restaurant's prime corner table, was Gideon Caldwell. To call Gideon a billionaire was an understatement. He was a force of nature, a personality so large it seemed to bend the room's gravity around him. At 48, he still possessed the restless, predatory energy of a much younger man. His hair was a distinguished salt and pepper, impeccably styled. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford, a shade of charcoal so dark it was nearly black, fitting his formidable frame without a single wrinkle. He wasn't handsome in a classical sense. His features were too sharp, his jaw too aggressive, his pale blue eyes too piercing. They were the eyes of a hawk, constantly scanning, assessing and judging everything in his line of sight as either an asset or an obstacle. Gideon was the founder and CEO of Helios Innovations, a green energy behemoth that had revolutionized solar power. His public persona was that of a visionary, a savior of the planet cloaked in the armor of capitalism. He gave rousing speeches at climate summits. His face graced the covers of Forbes and Time, and he spoke of a brighter future powered by clean, sustainable energy. But the men at his table knew the real Gideon. They were Franklin Shaw, his hawk-nosed, perpetually anxious chief legal counsel, and two grim-faced investment bankers from Goldman Sachs. They weren't there to save the planet. They were there to conquer it. Spread between them, protected from the wine glasses, like a sacred text, was a single-bound document. Its cover was unassuming navy blue, but the words printed on it were worth more than the entire restaurant, its staff and all its patrons combined. Project Constellation, Final Merger Agreement, Helios Innovations, and Solstice Dynamics. This was the deal of Gideon's life. The acquisition of Solstice, his largest competitor, would create a global monopoly, a solar empire so vast it would make OPEC look like a corner store. It was the culmination of a decade of ruthless competition, corporate espionage, and brutal market manipulation, and it was almost his. The board at Solstice is skittish. One of the bankers, a man named Peterson, murmured, dabbing his lips with a napkin. Regina Beaumont is a shark. She's looking for any reason to demand another 5%. Gideon let out a low, dismissive chuckle. Regina can demand whatever she wants. Her company's core technology is a decade old. Our Chimera panel is 5 years ahead of anything she has in the pipeline. She needs our tech more than we need her distribution network. She'll sign. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that carried implicit authority. He didn't raise it. He didn't have to. Franklin Shaw, a man paid an obscene amount of money to worry, shifted in his seat. The optics, Gideon. We have to be careful. The antitrust committees are already watching us. A single PR disaster. PR. Gideon scoffed, taking a sip of his $4,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux. We are the PR Franklin. We're giving the world cheap, clean energy. We're the good guys. No one's going to shed a tear for our competitors. He tapped the merger document with a thick, confident finger. This is destiny. It's done. He exuded an aura of absolute certainty that was intoxicating to those in his orbit and terrifying to those who stood in his way. He saw the world as a simple equation, his will and the variables that needed to be bent to it. People were instruments, waitstaff lawyers, bankers. They were all just tools to facilitate his existence. And that's all he saw when a young woman approached his table to refill their water glasses. A tool, a function. He didn't register her face, her posture, or the deep, weary intelligence in her dark eyes. He registered only a presence that was, for a moment, in his space. Her name was Nina Petrova. To the patrons of Ethelgard, she was just another part of the impeccable service. A slender figure in a starched black uniform, her dark brown hair pulled back in a severe tight bun. She moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of years of practice, her steps soundless on the plush carpet. She was 27, but a certain weariness around her eyes made her seem older. Most people's gazes slid right off her. She had perfected the art of being invisible, a necessary survival skill in her line of work. But Nina was not invisible, and she was certainly not a nobody. The life she lived outside these hallowed walls was a world away from the scent of truffle oil and vintage wine. Her tiny apartment in Queens was crammed not with fashion magazines, but with textbooks on quantum physics and material science. Her laptop, a battered old machine, was filled with complex energy model simulations that would have made the R&D team at Helios Innovations weep with envy. Nina was a ghost. She was the daughter of Dr. Mikhail Petrov, a name that had once been whispered with reverence in the most advanced energy labs in the world. A brilliant, gentle scientist who had pioneered a new type of photovoltaic cell, a technology he'd playfully codenamed Project Chimera because it combined 3 different, previously incompatible energy absorption methods. It was a breakthrough that promised to double the efficiency of solar energy. Mikhail had made the fatal mistake of trusting a charismatic young entrepreneur who had promised him the world a partnership, a state-of-the-art lab and unlimited funding. A young, hungry Gideon Caldwell. Gideon had taken Mikhail's research, his prototypes, his life's work, and filed the patents under his own name, backed by a team of ruthless lawyers. He'd left Mikhail with nothing but a paltry, insulting severance package and a non-disclosure agreement, so ironclad it was a legal prison. The betrayal had broken Mikhail's spirit. He'd lost the will to fight, sinking into a deep depression that led to a fatal heart attack 2 years later. Nina was 19 when her father died. She inherited his grief, his injustice, and his brilliant mind. She'd put her own dreams of a PhD at MIT on hold, working a series of grueling, low-wage jobs to support herself, while she spent every spare moment continuing her father's work in secret. She hadn't just replicated it, she had improved upon it. Working at Ethelgard was a calculated move. It was a bitter pill serving men like the one who had destroyed her family, but it was also the best place in the city to gather information. To listen. For 2 years she had floated through these rooms pouring wine for the very bankers who funded Helios, clearing plates for the lawyers who protected its stolen secrets and waiting for the perfect moment. Tonight she sensed something different in the air, The presence of the merger document on Gideon's table was like a ticking clock, a deadline for the justice she had promised her father's memory. She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The time for waiting was running out. As she approached the table, she kept her eyes downcast, her movements fluid and unobtrusive. She reached for Franklin Shaw's water glass with a practiced, steady hand. And then it happened. A busboy, young and nervous, was hurrying past with a heavy tray of dirty dishes. His foot caught on the thick edge of the Persian rug. He stumbled, lurching forward, his tray tilting precariously. To save it, he instinctively threw out an arm, bumping squarely into Nina. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was unexpected. The jolt was just enough to upset her balance. The crystal water pitcher slipped from her grasp, but it was the bottle of red wine, the $4,000 Chateau Margaux she had just opened, that became the true agent of chaos. Her other hand, which had been resting on the edge of the service tray, knocked it over. Time seemed to slow down. For Nina, it was a horrifying, crystalline moment of clarity. She saw the arc of dark crimson liquid as the bottle toppled. It wasn't heading for Gideon's suit or the pristine white tablecloth. It was heading directly for Project Constellation. The splash was obscenely loud in the cathedral-like silence of the restaurant. A perfect dark red bloom of vintage Bordeaux exploded across the cover and top pages of the merger agreement. The ink on the title page began to bleed instantly, the words, "Final Merger Agreement," dissolving into a purple-red stain. For a split second, no one moved. It was a tableau of frozen horror. The bankers' mouths were agape. Franklin Shaw looked as though he'd been shot. The young busboy stood paralyzed, his face a mask of pure terror. And Gideon Caldwell, his face went through a terrifying transformation. The mask of the charming, visionary CEO dissolved, and in its place was something primal and ugly. His blue eyes, usually cold and calculating, flashed with white-hot rage. His jaw clenched so tightly that a muscle bulged violently in his cheek. The silence was shattered by his voice, not a yell at first, but a low, guttural snarl that was somehow more frightening. "You." The word was aimed at Nina like a bullet. He rose slowly from his chair, his large frame casting a shadow over her. Every eye in Ethelgard was now locked on their table. The quiet hum of conversation had ceased entirely. The only sound was the frantic, silent beating of Nina's own heart. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he said, his voice rising with each word, gaining a venomous edge. He wasn't speaking to her. He was indicting her in front of the world. Nina stood frozen, the fallen bottle at her feet. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident. The busboy. Gideon's laugh was a bark devoid of humor. "Do not shift your incompetence onto someone else. I'm talking to you." He jabbed a finger in her direction, his hand trembling with fury. "An accident. Stupidity isn't an accident. It's a character flaw, and you are riddled with it." He picked up the sodden document, holding it with 2 fingers as if it were a piece of garbage. Red wine dripped from its pages onto the pristine white tablecloth, each drop landing like a hammer blow. "This," he bellowed, his voice, now a full-throated roar that echoed through the vast dining room, was worth more than your entire pathetic life. This was the culmination of years of work by people who actually matter. People who build things, who create, and you in your clumsy, pointless existence managed to damage it. Diners at nearby tables flinched. A woman put a hand to her mouth. Someone in the back discreetly raised their phone, the small red dot of a recording light, winking on in the dim ambiance. Then another. And another. The room was full of silent witnesses, a digital jury capturing every moment. Franklin Shaw stood up, his face pale. "Gideon, please, let's handle this quietly." Gideon shoved him aside. Quietly, there's nothing quiet about this level of ineptitude. Look at her. He waved a dismissive hand at Nina. This is what happens when you let just anyone off the street into a place like this. People with no ambition, no purpose, no value. He turned his full, unrestrained fury on Nina. His face was inches from hers, his voice dripping with contempt. How much do you make in a year? 30,000, 40. Do you think that pittance gives you the right to even breathe the same air as the people at this table? You're a service provider, a function. You pour the wine, you clear the plates, and you stay out of the way. That is your only purpose on this earth. And you can't even do that right. Nina's face was pale, but her expression was beginning to change. The initial shock and fear were receding, replaced by something else, a cold, hard resolve that solidified in her dark eyes. This was it, the moment she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times, though she had never imagined it would be this public, this raw. She had envisioned a quiet confrontation, a letter, a lawsuit. Not this. This public crucifixion. But he had handed her the stage. He had turned the spotlight on them both. "I want you fired," Gideon snarled, turning to the restaurant manager, who was now rushing over his face, ashen. "Not tomorrow. Now. I want her thrown out of here like the trash she is. I don't want to see her face ever again." The manager, a normally unflappable man named Mr. Dubois, began to stammer. "Mr. Caldwell, I assure you, we will take care of it." 1,000 apologies. "Don't apologize to me," Gideon spat. "Make her apologize. Make her understand the cost of her failure." He turned back to Nina, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He expected tears. He expected begging. He wanted to see her break. Instead, he saw defiance. Nina slowly, deliberately lifted her chin. She met his gaze, and for the first time Gideon actually saw her. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the utter lack of fear. It was unsettling. It was not the look of a chastised servant. It was the look of an equal. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not loud. It was quiet, calm, and carried a chilling precision that cut through his rage like a scalpel. "You are right about one thing, Mr. Caldwell." She began her words, clear and steady. Every phone in the room was now aimed at her. "I am fired, so these will be my final words to you as an employee." She took a small step closer, forcing him to hold his ground. The air crackled with tension. "You're worried about the wine on your merger agreement?" She continued, her voice still low, but resonating with a strange power. "But you should be far more worried about the foundations upon which it's built. They are just as stained." Gideon's smirk faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. What did you say Nina's eyes bore into his? And she delivered the blow she had been holding for nearly a decade. "You should have been more careful with Project Chimera, Mr. Caldwell." The name hit the air and seemed to hang there, shimmering and deadly. Gideon's face went white. The blood drained from it so fast he looked like a marble statue. The name was a ghost, a secret, buried so deep he had almost forgotten its origins. To hear it from the lips of a waitress in a restaurant, it was impossible. But she wasn't finished. She leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow audible to everyone at the silent table. "My father was." She held his gaze for one more heart-stopping second, letting the full weight of her words land. She saw the dawning horror in his eyes, the frantic scramble of his memory, the realization that this was not a random accident. This was a reckoning. Then, with a grace and composure that defied the scene, Nina turned. She did not look at the horrified manager or the stunned bankers. She walked away from the table, her back straight, her steps measured and deliberate. She walked through the silent, staring crowd of diners past the bar and towards the staff exit. As the door swung shut behind her, a frantic buzz erupted in the dining room. But Gideon Caldwell didn't hear it. He stood frozen, the dripping document still in his hand. The name echoed in his mind. Project Chimera. And the final two words delivered with the quiet devastation of a verdict. My father. Franklin Shaw grabbed his arm. Gideon, who is she? What was she talking about? But Gideon couldn't answer. In that moment, he realized the spilled wine was the least of his problems. The ghost of a man he had destroyed years ago had just walked out of the room, and he had a terrifying feeling that she had just taken his entire future with her. Outside, the drizzle had turned into a downpour, but for Gideon Caldwell, the storm had just begun. The internet is a nervous system, and outrage is its synapse firing. The story of what happened at Ethelgard didn't trickle out. It flooded the network in successive, ever-clarifying waves. The first video hit social media before Gideon's driver had even pulled the limousine away from the curb. It was shot from a distance, grainy and chaotic. The audio was a muddy swamp of ambient noise, with Gideon's rage audible only as a series of furious, indistinct barks. The title was simple: Billionaire yells at Waitress. The initial comments were predictable. Typical 1% behavior. Disgusting. That poor girl. I hope she's okay. Someone find out who he is and cancel him. Gideon, stewing in the back of his car, saw it pop up on his feed and scoffed. He barked into his phone at his head of public relations. There's a video. Some tourist with a shaky phone. Make it disappear. Offer them money. Threaten a lawsuit. I don't care. Bury it. But you cannot bury a fire by throwing a single spade of dirt on it. An hour later, the second wave hit. A clearer video, filmed from a much closer table. Now his words were distinct, each syllable dripping with venom. The internet seized on the phrases, turning them into digital banners of condemnation. Your entire pathetic life. People with no ambition, no purpose, no value. The hashtag Yoshka Caldwell Collapse was born, and it began to climb the trending charts with terrifying speed. Gideon, now pacing the vast, silent expanse of his penthouse, watched the numbers tick upward. 1,000 retweets, 10,000, 50,000. The sense of absolute control that had defined his entire adult life was beginning to fray at the edges. This was no longer a contained incident. It was a public spectacle, and he was the unwilling star. Then, just after midnight, the third video dropped. The kill shot, filmed by a diner who had not just recorded, but had understood the gravity of the moment. The angle was perfect. The audio was pristine. It captured not just Gideon's tirade, but the profound, chilling silence that followed Nina's response. Her quiet, steady voice cut through the digital noise. You should have been more careful with Project Chimera, Mr. Caldwell. My father was. Suddenly, the entire conversation pivoted. The outrage over his behavior was eclipsed by a rabid, consuming curiosity. Project Chimera. What is that? A secret weapon? A failed product? Wait, her father. Who is her father? This isn't random. Someone check the Helios Innovations patent history. This feels like a corporate espionage story. The internet had its mystery. The digital bloodhounds were loose. Project Chimera began trending alongside SWOS Caldwell Collapse. The fire was now a firestorm. Gideon's phone, which had been buzzing with calls from his frantic PR team, now began to ring with a deeper, more ominous urgency. It was Franklin Shaw, his chief legal counsel. Gideon finally answered, his voice a low growl. What, Franklin? Gideon? You need to look at this. It's not just about the yelling anymore. They're digging. Franklin's voice was tight, strained with a panic that Gideon found infuriating. The tech forums, the financial subreddits, they're connecting dots. People are searching for advanced solar research from 15 years ago. The name Petrov has already come up in a thread about obscure photovoltaic pioneers. It's nothing, Gideon snarled, gesturing at the glittering, indifferent city lights beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. It's internet chatter. Petrov signed an NDA thicker than a phone book. There is no trail. Gideon, listen to me. Franklin pleaded, his voice dropping. The lawyerly caution was being stripped away, revealing the raw fear beneath. A non-disclosure agreement doesn't erase history. It doesn't delete university records or academic papers. This girl, whoever she is, she didn't just say something angry. She said something specific. She knew the name. That means she knows the story. We built this company, our entire valuation, for the Solstice merger on the Chimera panel. If the provenance of that tech comes into question, it won't. Gideon cut him off, his voice cold and hard. I'll find her. I'll pay her off. I'll bury her in litigation. I will handle it. Your job is to stop panicking and start preparing the non-denial denials. Now get off my phone. He hung up, but the bravado was a thin veneer over a growing chasm of dread. He stood before the window, seeing his own reflection superimposed over the city he owned. For the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt in the man staring back at him. He had always believed that power was the ability to create your own truth. He was about to find out if that was just one more lie he'd told himself. In a minimalist home office in Palo Alto, where the air smelled of eucalyptus and ambition, Regina Beaumont was not panicking. She was analyzing. A member of her corporate strategy team, ever vigilant, had sent her the link to the third video with a single line. You need to see this. She dismissed the shouting. It was boorish and predictable. Men like Gideon were emotional creatures beneath their bluster, a weakness she had often exploited. It was the waitress who fascinated her. Regina watched the video again, this time ignoring Gideon completely. She focused on Nina. She saw the initial flicker of fear quickly suppressed. She saw the way her spine straightened, the deliberate calm that settled over her features. This was not the reaction of a terrified, clumsy server. It was the composure of a soldier who had just pulled the pin on a grenade. And then the words. Project Chimera. Regina's mind, a finely tuned machine for pattern recognition, immediately cross-referenced the name with the thousands of pages of due diligence her team had prepared on Helios. The Chimera panel, the crown jewel, the single piece of technology upon which the entire multi-billion-dollar valuation rested. It was the one part of the Helios portfolio her tech team had flagged as having a superficially documented development history. A black box. She muted the video and dialed her head of R&D Dr. Aris Thorne, a man whose encyclopedic knowledge of tech history was legendary. Aris, wake up. I'm sending you a link, she said, her voice sharp and alive. Watch it. Then I want you to run a deep dive search. The parameters are photovoltaic research, photonic crystals, and multi-junction cells. The time frame is 14 to 18 years ago. Cross-reference it with the name Mikhail Petrov, Petrov. Check academic archives, patent office pre-filings, university research grants. I want to know everything about him by sunrise. Understood, Aris's sleepy voice replied, already becoming more alert. Any particular reason? Regina looked at the frozen image of Nina's face on her screen. Because I have a feeling, she said, a cold, strategic thrill running through her that we've been negotiating to buy a stolen house, and we just met the rightful heir. The subway ride back to Queens was a blur for Nina. The clatter of the train, the murmur of late-night conversations, the glow of 100 phone screens. It all felt distant, unreal. She huddled in her seat, the cheap fabric of her work uniform, feeling like a costume she could finally shed. With every stop, a new wave of emotion washed over her. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the raw, trembling nerve endings of fear. He would come after her. A man like Gideon Caldwell didn't just accept humiliation. He would use his army of lawyers, his private investigators, his immense wealth to crush her. The thought sent a tremor of terror through her. But beneath the fear was a bedrock of resolve. When she finally stepped into her small, book-crammed apartment, she felt like a soldier returning to her barracks. This was her sanctuary, her fortress of solitude. The familiar sight of her father's textbooks on the shelves and the complex equations scribbled on a whiteboard in the corner grounded her. This was her truth. This was what she was fighting for. She didn't try to sleep. Instead, she made a pot of strong black coffee, the ritual a small anchor in the storm of her life. For years she had planned this. Not the public drama, but the final revelation. She had all the ammunition she needed, carefully organized and preserved. She pulled a heavy, worn leather notebook from a locked box beneath her bed. Her father's journal. Its pages were a map of his mind, filled with his elegant script, detailed diagrams and dated entries that chronicled the birth of Project Chimera. She then retrieved the USB drives containing the digital ghosts of his life's work, scanned notebooks, original research files with metadata, proving their age, and early unfiled patent drafts. Her target had been chosen long ago. David Chen of the New York Times. She had read everything he had ever written. He was relentless ethical and had a gift for turning complex corporate malfeasance into compelling human stories. He didn't just report the crime, he honored the victims. He would honor her father. Sitting at her small kitchen table, the glow of her laptop illuminating her determined face, she began to type. Each keystroke was deliberate, a final, irreversible step. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but her purpose was stronger. Subject: the true story of Project Chimera. Body: Mr. Chen. My name is Nina Petrova. You may have seen a video of me online today. That was the end of one story, but I am writing to you about the beginning. My father was Dr. Mikhail Petrov. He was the brilliant scientist and visionary who created the technology that Gideon Caldwell now calls the Chimera Panel. He is the reason Helios Innovations exists. Mr. Caldwell took my father's research, his spirit, and his name, and left him with nothing. I have spent the last 8 years of my life preserving his work and his truth. I have proof. Journals, digital files, correspondence, everything. If you are interested in a story about how a $10 billion company was built on a lie and how a great man's legacy was stolen, I am ready to talk. Sincerely, Nina Petrova. She paused, her finger hovering over the mouse. She took one last look at a framed photo of her and her father on her desk. He was laughing his arm around a teenage Nina. It was a picture from before. Before Gideon. Before the light went out of his eyes. "This is for you, Papa," she whispered. She attached a single carefully chosen file, a scan of a journal page from 15 years ago. On it was a detailed hand-drawn diagram of the Chimera cell's unique triple-junction structure, an image so foundational that any expert would recognize it instantly. It was the genesis. It was the truth. She clicked, "Send." The email vanished into the digital ether, a quiet declaration of war sent from a tiny apartment in Queens. The firestorm now had its fuel. The inferno was coming. The article did not simply appear. detonated. At 5:00 a.m. Eastern Time, the homepage of the New York Times transformed. A powerful, stark headline materialized in bold black font, sitting above a grainy, decade-old photograph of a smiling, dark-haired man standing proudly before a whiteboard filled with complex equations. The stolen Sun Helios innovations built on decade-old intellectual property theft documents show by David Chen. Within minutes, it was as if a digital dam had burst. The story flooded every corner of the internet, carried on currents of shares, retweets, and frantic emails. It was the lead story on every news aggregator, the top link on every financial forum. David Chen's Pulitzer Prize-winning reputation gave it an immediate, unimpeachable gravity. This wasn't celebrity gossip or speculative rumor. This was a meticulously researched journalistic indictment. In his sterile glass penthouse overlooking a sleeping Central Park, Gideon Caldwell saw it happen in real time. He hadn't slept fueled by a toxic cocktail of rage, fear, and caffeine. He sat before a bank of monitors, the harsh blue light carving sharp lines into his exhausted face. He was refreshing the Times homepage every 10 seconds, his heart pounding with a dread he hadn't felt since he was a penniless nobody fighting for his first seed investment. When the headline appeared, the breath left his body in a ragged gasp. He clicked, and the world he knew began to dissolve. The article was a masterclass in narrative destruction. It didn't just present facts, it wove a story of human tragedy. It began with Dr. Mikhail Petrov, not as a faceless researcher, but as a father, an immigrant genius, a man with a gentle spirit and a brilliant mind. Chen had found old colleagues who spoke of Mikhail's infectious passion and his groundbreaking work on A New Dawn for Solar. The scanned pages of the journal were damning, the elegant handwritten equations a ghostly testament to a truth Gideon had buried for 15 years. Then came his own chapter. Chen used Gideon's own public quotes about integrity and vision as a scalpel, juxtaposing them with the cold, hard facts of the legal documents that had imprisoned Mikhail. He saw the scanned signature page of the non-disclosure agreement, his own arrogant scrawl next to Mikhail's hesitant, defeated one. He saw the financial records, the insulting pittance paid for a technology that had minted him as a billionaire. But it was the story of Nina that truly twisted the knife. The quiet daughter, the brilliant mind forced into servitude, working in the shadow of her family's destroyer, reading about her life, the menial jobs, the secret study, the quiet vow to her father's memory, filled him not with remorse, but with a fresh wave of impotent fury. How dare she? How dare this nothing, this girl hold a mirror up to him? Lies, it's all lies. He roared at the empty room, shoving a monitor off his desk. It crashed to the white marble floor, the screen spiderwebbing into 1,000 fractured pieces, a perfect metaphor for his public image. His phone began to scream a shrill, incessant cry. It was Franklin Shaw, the board members, his PR chief. He ignored them all. He was still Gideon Caldwell. He could fix this. He would sue the Times, sue the girl until she had nothing left. He would launch a counter-offensive, a media blitz that would bury this story in an avalanche of his own narrative. But as he paced his shattered office, a cold, creeping realization began to dawn. The story was too perfect. The evidence was too strong. The narrative of the brilliant wronged father and the valiant avenging daughter was a mythic archetype. He was cast as the dragon, and dragons always get slain. Thousands of miles away, in the cool, controlled environment of the Solstice Dynamics headquarters, Regina Beaumont watched the same story unfold, but with the cold detachment of a grandmaster watching a rival blunder. She had assembled her core team in a secure conference room at dawn. "Legal, what's our exposure if we proceed?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. A lawyer, sharp and severe, adjusted his glasses. "If even 10% of this article is verifiable, and from the looks of these documents, it's closer to 100, Helios has committed fundamental misrepresentation. The Chimera IP, the core asset of this deal, is built on a fraudulent foundation. Proceeding would be corporate suicide. We'd be acquiring a company whose primary asset is a lawsuit waiting to happen, not to mention the reputational fallout." Regina turned to her head of R&D, Dr. Aris Thorne. "Aris, the science." Aris pointed to a projection of one of Mikhail's journal pages. "It's not just real Regina, it's more advanced than we thought. Look at this notation here. He was already theorizing a method to overcome thermal degradation, something Helios's current panels still struggle with. They didn't just steal his work, they failed to even fully understand it. The source code, so to speak, belongs to him, or rather, to his heir." Regina Beaumont leaned back, a slow, predatory smile touching her lips for the first time that day. It all clicked into place. The PR nightmare for Helios was a godsend for her. The fraudulent IP gave her an ironclad exit, and the original superior technology was now potentially in play, held by a brilliant, motivated young woman who clearly had no love for the competition. The board meeting was a formality. The decision was hers, and it was absolute. Within the hour, the press release was dispatched. It was a masterpiece of corporate assassination, polite on the surface, utterly devastating in its subtext. Solstice Dynamics has officially terminated all merger negotiations with Helios Innovations. We stand for innovation, but we also stand for integrity. It is clear that Helios Innovations, under the leadership of Gideon Caldwell, lacks the latter. The stock market, already in a panic, responded as if it had been shot in the heart. HLTS didn't just trade down, it ceased to be a viable entity. It was a digital bonfire, and Gideon's fortune was the fuel. In a small sunlit apartment in Queens, Nina Petrova sat at her kitchen table, staring at the same New York Times page. She had been awake all night, a knot of anxiety and anticipation tightening in her stomach. When the story finally went live, she read it with tears streaming down her face. She saw her father's face, his warm smile looking out from the screen, and a wave of grief so profound it buckled her forward, hit her. He wasn't here to see this. He would never know that the world finally understood his genius, his contribution. She traced his photograph on the screen with her finger. "They know Papa," she whispered into the quiet of the room. "I told them. They finally know." The grief was followed by a wave of pure, liberating vindication. Every equation David Chen had published was a testament to her father's legacy. Every quote from a former colleague was a stone relaid in the foundation of his honor, and her own story, told with such dignity and respect, made her feel seen for the first time in her life. She wasn't the clumsy waitress or the angry woman from the viral video. She was Nina Petrova, daughter of Mikhail Petrov, and she had done what she set out to do. The truth was out. The rest was just noise. She spent the day unplugged from the ensuing chaos, ignoring the dozens of calls from unknown numbers and the deluge of social media notifications. She drank tea, held her father's worn journal to her chest, and let herself feel the full, complicated weight of the moment. It wasn't a celebration. It was a memorial. A quiet, solemn, and deeply personal victory. The final act took place on the 30th floor. The air in the Helios boardroom was thick and suffocating, the silence broken only by the distant, panicked shouts from the trading floor below. The board members were arranged around the long mahogany table, like statues in a tomb. They all shared the same grim expression, a mask of self-preservation and barely concealed fury. Gideon walked in, attempting to project an aura of command he no longer possessed. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes were bloodshot, and a fine tremor ran through his hands. He took his seat at the head of the table, the throne from which he had ruled for 2 decades. It felt alien to him now. Eleanor Schmidt, the chairwoman, did not waste time with pleasantries. Her face was granite, her eyes 2 chips of ice. The stock has lost over 60% of its value in 3 hours, Gideon. She began her voice, low and controlled. Our merger with Solstice, the cornerstone of our 5-year plan, has been publicly terminated in the most humiliating way possible. The SEC is rumored to be preparing a formal inquiry, and a class action suit on behalf of the shareholders was filed less than an hour ago. The company is for all intents and purposes insolvent. She slid a printed copy of Regina Beaumont's press release across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of him. Is there anything in David Chen's article? She continued, her voice dropping further, or in this statement from Ms. Beaumont, that you can prove is factually incorrect. Gideon stared at the paper. This was his last stand. The narrative is a distortion. He began, his voice raspy. Petrov was a contract researcher. His work was work for hire. The patents are legal. This is a personal vendetta, a media hit job. A media hit job. Eleanor interrupted, her voice finally cracking with contempt. We have seen the notebooks, Gideon. The Times posted high-resolution scans. We have had our own IP council look at them. They are dated. They predate you. They predate Helios. Did you or did you not take this man's complete and revolutionary research, patent it as your own, and then bind him with an NDA to ensure his silence? Gideon looked around the table from face to face. He saw Franklin Shaw staring intently at a legal pad. He saw Peterson the banker from the restaurant looking at the ceiling. He saw nothing but men desperate to distance themselves from his contagion. His bluster died in his throat. The silence was his confession. Eleanor nodded, a grim finality in her expression. I see. The board convened an hour ago prior to your arrival. We are contractually obligated to give you a chance to speak, and you have spoken. The vote was unanimous. In accordance with Article 7, Section 4 of the Corporate Bylaws regarding gross misconduct, fiduciary negligence, and actions resulting in catastrophic detriment to the corporation's standing. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on him. Gideon Caldwell, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board of Helios Innovations, effective immediately. You will vacate your office by the end of the day. Your assets in the company are frozen, pending the outcome of the federal investigation. She looked him dead in the eye. Security will escort you out. The words seemed to come from a great distance. Fired. Escorted out. He felt a strange sense of dislocation, as if he were watching a movie about someone else. He stood up, knocking his chair back. A flicker of his old rage returned, a primal scream of defiance building in his chest. But it died before it could escape. What was the point? He looked at their faces, these men and women who had praised him, feared him, and profited from him. They were now his executioners. He was nothing to them. He turned and walked out of the boardroom. The 2 security guards who fell in, step beside him, were a quiet, final humiliation. The walk through the open-plan office was a gauntlet of stares. He saw contempt fear, and in the eyes of a few younger employees, a kind of morbid curiosity, as if he were a fallen statue, a relic of a bygone era. He didn't just build this company. He was this company, and now he was being evicted from his own soul. He stepped out of the revolving doors onto the street, clutching a small cardboard box containing a framed photo and a few personal trinkets. The New York hustle and bustle swirled around him, indifferent. He was just another man on the sidewalk. He looked up at the colossal tower of steel and glass, the word Helios, glinting in the afternoon sun. He had named it for a sun god. Now he was just Icarus. His stolen wings melted, plummeting back to earth. That evening, as the city lights began to sparkle, Nina Petrova's phone rang. It was an unknown California number. She took a breath and answered. "Is this Nina Petrova?" The voice was female, crisp with authority. "Yes, this is she. My name is Regina Beaumont. I'm the CEO of Solstice Dynamics." Nina's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, walking to the window that looked out over the rooftops of Queens. "I imagine you've had a difficult day," Regina continued. "I'm calling to commend you, not just for your courage, but for your integrity in honoring your father's work. I've had my best people analyzing the material in the Times article. His original concepts, they are extraordinary." "Thank you," Nina said, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't just a courtesy call, Ms. Petrova," Regina said, her tone shifting from commendation to business. "The work your father started deserves to be finished. The right way. By people who respect its origins." Caldwell's engineers barely scratched the surface of what's possible. A silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken potential. "I am flying to New York tomorrow," Regina said. "I would be very interested in meeting with you to discuss your future. Solstice Dynamics has one of the most advanced R&D facilities in the world. We don't just offer jobs, we offer partnerships to brilliant minds. I think it's the kind of place your father always dreamed of. A place to build, not to steal." Tears welled in Nina's eyes again. But these were different. They weren't for the past, but for the future. It was more than vindication. It was a beginning, a chance to step out of the shadow of her father's tragedy and into the light of his legacy. "Yes," Nina said, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a power she was only just beginning to recognize in herself. "Yes, Ms. Beaumont. I would like that very much." She ended the call and looked out at the sprawling city. Gideon Caldwell had lost an empire. But tonight, Nina Petrova had just inherited a world of possibility, and so the empire built on a lie crumbled to dust, not from a hostile takeover, but from a whisper of truth in a quiet restaurant. Gideon Caldwell, the man who had everything, lost it all because he failed to see the humanity in the person pouring his wine. He saw a function, not a person, a servant, not the keeper of a secret that could shatter his world. Nina Petrova's story is a powerful reminder that arrogance is a blindfold, and that true strength isn't about how loud you can shout, but about the unshakable power of your convictions. She didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her family's honor and stepped into a future of her own making. If this story of justice and the fall of a tyrant resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories